This is the story of a neckbeard who lived in someone's basement in the most backwater of backwater third world countries. He's someone who liked to shitpost online about his beliefs about politics and religion, and he spent the rest of his time watching porn on a shitty laptop. He managed to take down the two most powerful global empires that have ever existed in the history of mankind. It's the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan has become president. He won by a complete landslide. The biggest thing going on in the world right now is the Soviet Union is at war with Afghanistan. 19 years of war in Vietnam had taught these people that it's not worth it. Going to war to try and spread your political ideology to some unfamiliar third world country is an incredible waste of lives and resources. Therefore, the people running our government saw a golden opportunity. They finally had their chance to own the commies through the Soviet-Afghanistan war. All we would have to do is give a bunch of weapons to a bunch of backwater militia groups in Afghanistan and just tell them to take these weapons and go on a full-out Grand Theft Auto style rampage against those Soviet communists. And this is where our neckbeard comes into the story. Osama Bin Laden, son of the wealthy Bin Laden family, a Saudi Arabian man who saw an opportunity to build his own mercenary army. So he set up base in Pakistan, and he named his organization Al-Qaeda, which means the base. Through Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden coordinated various militia attacks on the Soviet Union troops in Afghanistan. The Soviet-Afghan war dragged on for years and years. It truly was equivalent to America's involvement in Vietnam. The war was also a huge burden on the Soviet Union economy, which was already somewhat fragile because of the high amount of corruption that existed in its communist government. In large part to its war with Afghanistan, the Soviet Union ended up collapsing entirely. Eastern Europe was liberated. Russia proper was split off into different countries, including Ukraine and Belarus. The Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union itself ceased to exist as an empire. Neckbeard Osama had taken down the second largest empire in the history of planet Earth. With the Soviet Union collapsed, Ronald Reagan sought to create a neo-liberal world order that would be backed up by the military might of the American empire.
That action should always be undertaken with allies and partners and friends. When the United States presents a united front, we have a much better chance of achieving our foreign policy aims. A united front, a united front, a united front.
Under this new neoliberal world order, national sovereignty was something that no longer mattered. The managerial class of the neoliberal world order would no longer see themselves as individuals of nations. Instead, they would be citizens of the globe. Likewise, in this new liberal world order, corporations wouldn't be confined to operating in a single nation. They would be global. Therefore, it was completely acceptable for American corporations to offshore jobs to places like China, where workers were treated terribly, with very low wages and very low worker protections or rights. In this new neoliberal order, the managerial class could do whatever they wanted. Classic American institutions such as churches and trade unions were dismantled, ignored, or belittled. Thus began the age of extreme liberal individualism. As rich people were liberated, we got things like gay rights, followed by transgender rights. Certain American companies like Uber didn't have to comply with labor regulations anymore. Illegal immigration skyrocketed, crime rates skyrocketed. America has become the place with the largest number of broken families in the world. And the United States increasingly used trade agreements and its military to enforce this type of society on the entire world. That is until the United States managed to piss off one particular neckbeard. This neckbeard happened to be the only man alive who had taken down an entire global empire. One thing that was abundantly clear in the 1980s was how important of a resource oil was. And one of the countries with the largest supply of oil in the world was none other than Osama's own home country, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabian government, which had been getting a lot of fat cash off its oil revenue, wanted to invest in some sort of security to protect that resource. They didn't want anyone to come in there and start screwing around with their sweet, sweet oil money. Osama saw this as a perfect opportunity. Al-Qaeda, the base, could return to his home country and guard the oil. He had just brought down one of the biggest empires in the world. No one more deserved the opportunity to protect Saudi Arabia's oil reserves than him. He had competently run his organization, Al-Qaeda, and he himself was a Saudi Arabian citizen. But the Saudi Arabian government didn't want to just hand over their huge strategic resources to some neck-bearded guy who had been living in caves for the past decade. So instead, they negotiated a deal with the United States, where the United States would open a military base in Saudi Arabia to make sure that that oil was protected. To Osama Bin Laden, this was a complete outrage that his country would allow foreigners to open up a military base in the sacred country of Saudi Arabia, the kingdom that stands at the center of the Islamic religion. Osama viewed this as an act of war. But what exactly was he going to do about it? Was he going to load up all of these Al-Qaeda members on some ships, sail across the Atlantic Ocean, land on Virginia Beach, and just start shooting people? Osama had no real way to wage war on the United States, so he had to think about it and come up with some sort of cunning plan. So Osama thought about it, and he reflected on how he defeated the world's second biggest empire, the Soviet Union. Upon reflection, he came up with a plan: lure the United States into invading Afghanistan and then fight them on his own turf. Provoke the US soldiers into a never-ending onslaught of little mini conflicts. Do things like set traps for them, vandalize their buildings, make any sort of progress in resolving the war extremely expensive for the United States. These are the sort of tactics that allowed a neckbeard living in a cave to take down the second biggest empire the world had ever seen. So Osama began to do things to try and provoke the United States to sending troops into Afghanistan where he could launch his secret plan. At first, he was ignored, but then he had a brilliant plan. What if they were to fly planes in the skyscrapers in New York? That would get people's attention, right? You see, the most important people, the people with real power in this country, all live in Wall Street. So Osama figured if they flew planes into skyscrapers that were literally right next to Wall Street, that would have to get some attention. That would be a way to provoke a reaction from the United States. And you know what? Osama Bin Laden was exactly right. Not long after the September 11th attacks, George W. Bush had the US military invade Afghanistan. And stupidly, not long after this, he also invaded Iraq for some reason. The United States easily defeated the governments running these countries, but then got bogged down in endless amounts of bullshit. The wars were, and continue to be, incredibly expensive. It was Vietnam all over again. Although initially supportive, the American people quickly began to realize that this was a bad idea, that this was a waste of money and lives, that fighting these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan did not benefit the United States. They wanted a change in leadership to get us out of these goddamn wars. A lot of these Americans, particularly those on the left or who were members of the Democratic Party, watched the 2004 Democratic Convention. The keynote speaker at this convention was a relatively unknown Democratic politician named Barack Obama. During his speech, Obama did not talk about any foreign policy. He talked about rebuilding America, making it great again. People began to see Obama as someone who could lead us out of these stupid, pointless wars. The way Obama talks is not like one of these people who sees themselves as a citizen of the world. He constantly talks about America. It seems like he's a nationalist, like he's someone who's going to get us out of these wars. Americans had hoped that if someone like Obama were to become president, that he would rebuild the country. He would rebuild the community and society that previously existed in America, which had been replaced by this neoliberal world order. So even though Barack Obama had basically no accomplishments, he had literally done nothing in his political career, he was elected president of the United States. His campaign slogan was hope and change. Americans were so eager to get us out of this stupid neoliberal world order that they were willing to put any prejudices they had aside and vote for a black man with the middle name Hussein. At the very least, they hoped that he could get us the hell out of the Middle East. Obama failed to deliver any change to the American people. The wars continued. He made absolutely no effort to rebuild American community or society. With Hillary Clinton as his Secretary of State, he assassinated Gaddafi and caused a refugee crisis in Europe. The neoliberal order was continued. In 2012, Barack Obama was challenged by Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is a guy who became obscenely wealthy by buying up just enough shares in a company that he could force them to liquidate massive numbers of employees. Mitt Romney would then extract as much short-term profits out of the company that he could just to sell his stocks, leaving many of these once great companies nothing more than used up husks of their previous selves. He was someone that obviously was going to continue the status quo, that if Americans were to elect him as president, he would continue with Obama's policies. He'd continue to promote the neoliberal world order. With no real alternatives, Americans re-elected Barack Obama. And Obama continued doing what he was doing. He continued to prop up the neoliberal world order, and he continued to fight wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The 2016 presidential election is approaching, and the American people are extremely pissed off. They've had enough of this neoliberal world order. Both Americans on the right and on the left are completely tired of this bullshit. Donald Trump sees this as an opportunity to run as a populist. He sets himself apart immediately from the other Republican primary candidates by coming out hard against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He makes his campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." He co-opts Obama's emphasis on rebuilding America and focusing primarily on the United States. He also makes it real clear that he doesn't give a shit about political correctness. This is a really big deal because the people who benefit from and support the neoliberal world order, they view political correctness as some sort of sacred responsibility. To these people, neoliberalism is something akin to a religion. And if you say something that could be considered to be Islamophobic or homophobic, then that's akin to you committing blasphemy to these people. The managerial class of the neoliberal order is absolutely obsessed with therapy and authoritarianism. Whenever someone says something that contradicts the neoliberal world order, they get labeled as either having some sort of mental problem or being a secret Nazi. For example, a lot of the words that neoliberals like to use, like Islamophobia or perhaps homophobia, are not real medical conditions. If you're a person with a legitimate phobia, let's use, for example, agoraphobia, the fear of being in a wide open place, and then you're placed in that condition, you're going to have an absolute mental breakdown. The sort of people who are constantly labeled Islamophobic or homophobic don't react to gay people or Muslims in this way. They just happen to have political beliefs at odds with the neoliberal world order. Likewise, neoliberals will accuse anyone who says something that's opposed to their agenda as being a secret Nazi. So if you say something, for example, like you oppose illegal immigration, or you're concerned about crime in your community, then you get labeled as a secret neo-Nazi, a crypto-fascist, or a racist by the neoliberal world order. So Trump easily wins the Republican primary. and then he beats Hillary Clinton by a landslide. The mainstream news media, which represents the mouthpiece of the neoliberal world order, is absolutely stunned. For the first time, the managerial class is confronted with the fact that perhaps the vast majority of Americans absolutely despise them and despise the neoliberal world order. But rather than reflect on this and change what they're doing, they've instead chosen to engage in motivated reasoning. They pretend that the only reason that Trump was ever elected was because of a Russian conspiracy. They come up with these insane theories like Donald Trump won because of a surge of white nationalism as a form of denial. It's now 3 years into Trump's presidency, and it looks like he's mostly failed to bring about the changes he campaigned for. If you want to be charitable to Trump, you can blame the neoliberal world order, which seems to control all other aspects of government, society, and culture. That perhaps any candidate for office who ran on an agenda opposed to the neoliberal world order would inevitably fail. Looking at our current situation, I make the following observations. We're still in war with Afghanistan, despite the fact that the vast majority of Americans are of the belief that we should have left that country a long time ago. As people become more and more frustrated, they become increasingly more partisan. The government shutdowns, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, the impeachment trial that's going on in the Senate right now, all of the conspiracy theories constantly being made by figures in our media, the strange things that happen during the Democratic debates that seem to prevent Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard from having as fair of a shot as the other candidates, and the popularity of Bernie Sanders, the left-wing equivalent to a Donald Trump, someone who the neoliberal world order absolutely despises, are all evidence that the American neoliberal empire is on the verge of collapsing. What's so crazy about this is Osama Bin Laden, the neckbeard who was living in a basement of a house in Pakistan when he was killed by Navy SEALs, may in fact actually win. This never-ending war in Afghanistan that he provoked the United States into may end up being a major factor in the complete destruction of the neoliberal world order. Therefore, there's a real possibility that a single man, Osama Bin Laden, may have been able to take down the two most powerful global empires to ever exist in all of human history. He's definitely a mass murderer who deserved to die, but you have to admit, that's pretty damn impressive.